Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show with my co-host Alex Sashlow. This week, Texas Democrats are taking a stand. Trump is finally getting his meeting with Putin.
Probably.
Plus, well, maybe. Plus, Alex found one number that tells us a lot. We'll explain, and we promise to get to more of your questions after a few busy weeks. So, Alex, where should we get started, my friend?
Let's go to Texas, Joe. Okay, so for background, Trump said you got to redistrict. So Texas Republicans said, yeah, okay, we're going to redistrict. They're basically trying to gerrymander the map, add something like 5 seats, which would give it, I think, a 30-8 margin. I think I have that math right. A bunch of Texas Democrats have left the state to deny Republicans the quorum, which basically means while they're out of the state, they can't vote on it. Trump and Cornyn and a bunch of people are trying to get the FBI involved, drag people back. Joe, and we'll get to what Democrats are doing in fighting back, right? But there's no way that this kind of power grab can last all that much longer, right? Is this just for 2026? Is this longer term? Like this is just them gaming the rules because they see the writing on the wall, right?
Well, I mean, look, they know they're losing. I mean, they know that the favorability ratings for the administration for Trump and what's going on with mass deportations, inflation, the economy, and even now this is driving their numbers lower. So, yeah, they're desperately trying to rig exactly, the whole thing that all these years, he's been talking about the elections were rigged. Well, now they are rigging. They really are. Those were all bullshit lies, but now the rigging is happening in plain sight. And I think this whole thing is bringing a lot of attention to how autocratic, to how outside the, not norm, but outside like really where the American people are in terms of they know what this is. They see this as a power grab. I think the Democrats leaving the state, taking that courageous stand. And what's important, and we know this, we've talked about this. We're now in an attention information system where getting attention matters. And so the Democrats leaving the state, standing up to this, has gotten attention everywhere, including in other states, California, New York, Illinois, and other places that are now looking at this and saying, well, look, if Republicans, and this is the key, if Republicans don't do this, if Texas doesn't do this, there's no one in California or New York or Illinois who's going to fight fire with fire. Will go with the seats as they were drawn under the way it's supposed to happen every 10 years after the census that occurred in 2020. Those seats should stand for 10 years and then be redrawn. And so by doing what they're doing, if they do it, this is not about partisan politics. It's about an autocratic grab for power and taking power actually away from the rest of the country. So I think if they leave this alone and walk away, you won't see this happen in other places. But if they do it, if they actually go through with it, if they go out and drag these Democrats back or replace them with phony Democrats so they can hold a vote, then I think you're going to see not only, I guess what I've been saying all along about this is that this is a moment where all of us, Republicans, independents, Democrats, if you care about democracy, you have to stand in protest with the Democrats who fled Texas and are refusing to go back to allow a vote on this. And so I think it's time for us to get loud, to call every Republican in every office in the country and ask them if they stand for democracy or they stand for this autocratic power grab by Trump and the Texas Republicans. We have to protest rallies, no kings. This is stopping the king. That's what this would be about. We have to get loud and get visible. We have to stand with the Democrats in Texas
I
and
really
hope that,
like what
yeah,
Mike Nellis said on his newsletter, which I linked to today on Trippi Takes, but he gets into look how authoritarian and corrupt this is. But his point, which I think I agree with, is none of this will save them. You can't gerrymander your way
Right.
out of a grocery bill. You can't redraw a map big enough to make people forget that their paycheck disappears by the 15th of the month and so on. So
Well,
we'll get to that.
he said that basically they're making the same mistake that Biden Democrats and Harris made the last couple of years, which was you keep telling people like the jobs numbers are great, but people, and we've made this
Yeah.
point on other
Yeah. No,
episodes. But yeah, it doesn't work. And that's why they are doing this redistricting scam in Texas, right? Because they know it's not working. They know they're in deep trouble. They've seen the erosion, particularly with independents, which I have just never seen this kind of collapse with independents with either party. Like, they swing both ways, but never anything like this. I mean,
yeah,
literally
and we'll
30
get to
point
that
swings.
number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he sums it up and then we'll move on, but Fox News wants to talk GDP, but because real Americans don't experience the economy in data points. They experience it in questions like, can I buy a house? Can I raise a family? Can I retire with dignity? Can I afford college for my kids? Can I be a normal human being? And his point, and if you look at, it's not just the Gallup poll, which we'll get to, more navigator stuff that I know we always cite. Most Americans now say that their lives are worse than they were 6 months ago. So again, the key there
So,
is not that, some of that's partisan driven, but now you're way over. You're into those independents. You're into some of those Republicans who are waking up and realizing, I'm starting to feel the pain.
well, and like I think in the past episode, I talked about how we're now at a place where over 50% of the American people are saying they're ashamed that Donald Trump's their president. We're
Right.
not talking about favorable and unfavorable. We're talking about, and that's what I'm saying. I think this goes beyond the economic impact. I know what you're talking about, and you're right. All those numbers are horrible, but I think it's going deeper. I think people are realizing. I mean, when you talk about it, if you're not happy with somebody on the economy, it affects their approval, but you're not ashamed of them, right? I mean, the ashamed thing I think gets more to the extremes on the mass deportations, on picking people up without due process, on separating families, children from their parents, and using that as a battering ram against when you're deporting people, giving them the choice. They leave altogether or they've got to leave their children or stay and get separated. These are all the kinds of cruel choices. And then on top of that, the Epstein scandal, the cover up, sending her down to, a country farm prison in Texas while you gym up the story about how, she's going to say that Trump did nothing wrong, but they're really going out of their way. But my point is, it's not lost. The American people, it turns out, are not as dumb as Donald Trump thinks they are. And so I think it's starting to catch up to him, not just in approval, but literally, I learned a long time ago, back in 1990, in a race that I was doing, which is literally the last time I saw shame tested in a poll. But it was when the incumbent we were running against, when people finally crossed and stopped going from unfavorable, but went to say they were ashamed of him. When we saw that in the data, that's what told us we were going to come back from like a 29-point deficit and have one of the biggest upsets of the 1990 cycle. And I know that's a long time ago, folks. And yes, that experience and my age does show sometimes, hopefully with some wisdom, but often proving a point. And this one, I think, is going to matter. When you start seeing a majority of voters start saying they're ashamed of something, that is one of the most powerful inputs you can get to tell you where this is going.
Well,
They
and
know it,
it's
and that's why they're starting to steal. They're trying to rig the election by stealing seats, and we cannot let them get away with it. We must make our voices heard, hold every Republican's feet to the fire, and make them choose now. Are they for this power grab? Or will they stand with Trump and once, like these Republicans in Texas, do his bidding so that he can
right.
keep?
Well, they're going to do that. They're going to stand
Yeah,
with Trump.
but we need
The
to be
interesting
loud
thing,
about
though,
it.
oh, sure. And we need to put them on the record. I do think what Democrats in California and New York, and I know New York has some state constitutional reasons why they likely can't. But it is interesting that you're seeing Hochul and Newsom and Democrats in the bluer states where we could do the same thing back. They are fighting fire with fire and threatening the same thing. Like Democrats are not powerless here. They want Texas Republicans and Trump want everybody else to roll over. But like, I mean, I saw a map of Illinois, Joe, that, I mean, in terms of gerrymandering, my friend, this one was very creative. But again, that could cost Republicans 3 seats if they go down this path. It does feel like you're starting to see Democrats
Well,
starting
you
to play
have
the same game that the Republicans are,
no,
which is a good thing.
yeah, you have to fight fire with fire because this isn't two parties fighting each other. It's autocrats, and we're fighting for democracy. And so, yes, it turns everything. They're turning everything upside down. Where yes, you have to fight. We cannot do. Oh no, an independent commission will draw the lines. We've done that. That's what happens in California. That's what happens in a lot of states that Democrats run. But in the states that Republicans run, there's no there, it's Abbott and whatever the legislature decides it wants to do in Texas, the Republican legislature. And so, yeah, California will have to go to a vote, probably put it on the ballot this November to allow the governor and the legislature to draw the lines instead of the independent commission there. And they won't do that if Republicans stand pat. But if they start doing this, then this it crosses. You have to fight fire with fire because the fire on the other side is to take us to an autocratic dictatorship, to a one-party rule, permanent one-party rule, where it just goes from Trump to Don Jr. to Vance, whoever, and back and forth. But we'll never have. I mean, that's what this is about. It's what Texas did the last time around when they redrew the lines for the state house, for the state legislature, and took it from, basically the Democrats had like a 2-seat majority and took it and made it like 65, 35, 70, 30 in terms of the way that when they had finally got into power, that's what they did. Now they're doing it midway through. This is supposed to happen every 10 years. They're doing it 5 years in. Why? One reason only. They know they're going to lose the House. And those 5 seats, when they only hold it by 3, will be the difference. That's what they're planning on. And it won't stop there. They'll do this across the country. And if that happens, then yeah, you're either giving up on democracy because you're not going to fight fire with fire. They're going low. We'll go high. Bullshit. Not when democracy itself is on the line. And by the way, that's my whole point. This can't be just the California legislature or the New York legislature or the Illinois legislature or Texas. This has to be Americans saying no, no fucking way. We will stand in the streets and protest peacefully and rise up by the millions if you continue down this path. And I can't overemphasize that enough, that it's time to stop being spectators and watching these, oh, they're leaving, they're going to Illinois, oh, this is happening, watching. No, retweeting a post praising the Texas Democrats for standing up. No. I mean, that's great, but no. You have to call every Republican office in the House, Senate, your county commissioners, whatever, and bang the phones that you're not going to stand for this, that they have to move away from this, that they have to stop tearing down our democracy. Then we have to, like the next No Kings rally, wherever it is, find it, whatever date it is, go to it, bring people and protest this, stand with those Texas Democrats. That's what I think is fundamentally, it's the one thing, I've said this before, it's the one thing the Supreme Court might get when there's millions of people outside the court. It's the one thing, and peaceful, nonviolent protests. But you cannot lose faith in our power, and you cannot lose faith in your power to impact this. And now is the time to, if you haven't risen up, now's the time to start.
Well, let's talk more about how that's actually impacting things right now. And again, I found this actually, I saw the numbers, but until I saw it and someone posted a graph on Reddit, it's really, really staggering. And this is Trump's approval as measured by Gallup, what's happened to it. Look, everyone knows the top lines. He started at 47, which is one of his highest marks ever, still below 50. He's now down to 37 in just 6 months. He's lost 2 points with Republicans. He's basically lost every Democrat, but that was to be expected. But the big number, Joe,
Hmm.
that I had to see it, and for our listeners, I'm moving my arm down fairly dramatically right now. He went from 46 with independents, which again matched basically his overall number. He's lost half of them. He's down to 23. And ultimately, like the
Yeah, that
37% approval is kind of his, it'll be close to his low watermark because, the MAGA base is never going to say he's doing a bad job. But losing half your independence is a ton, right?
well, no, you just have to look at he's at 23 with independents, right? I mean, is that right?
Yep.
23. I was looking at numbers like a week or two ago that had him at 31 with independents. It's an unbelievable number.
Which he'd probably
23.
chew your arm off for right now, and it's still really
Yeah.
bad.
No, 23. You got to realize what that means. I mean, this independence, these are people who really just claim their independence because, it's become popular not to be in either party or don't like either party. And that's why when you look at numbers, you look at these polls, what's happening is usually you'll see, 90% of Democrats support the Democrat, 89, something like that. 4 or 5, maybe 10% are going with the Republican and vice versa. Republicans, 89, 90% for Trump and, 6, 7, 8% might be voting for the Democrat. It's the independents and the margin that one of the parties builds with them that generally, makes up, the difference in most of these states. And the numbers usually, this not you don't see 90 to 10. You see, 56% of independents are more leaning more Republican, 44% more Democrat. You see maybe 53% are moving more Democrat, 47% are moving more Republican when they start to decide things. You're looking at a sitting president of the United States who is sitting right now at 23% with independents. And I'm sure if you took an average of all of them, it's going to be maybe low 30s, 31, as I was saying. That number is devastating. And I've never seen that ever. I don't
Well,
even
I
think
can
back
tell
when
you,
Jimmy Carter, I don't think I saw
yeah.
that.
Well, I can tell you one number I've seen before, and this is even worse news for Trump. So the recent Fox News poll, and again, this is Fox News. His approval rating was pretty bad in that poll too. It might have been low 30s at best. But if you look at it on it, his number on inflation was only 36 approved. That was Joe Biden's lowest number on inflation last year, just for
Right.
context. After he got hammered by Trump forever on inflation and ultimately probably cost Democrats the election, that single issue. We can talk more about that ad nauseum. But he is at the same point Joe Biden was when Joe Biden was at his lowest point, which should tell you everything. And now you understand why they're doing this in Texas, why I'm sure next week we'll wake up and they'll try something in Georgia or wherever. But it's just so obvious that this first 6 months hasn't worked. People are not buying that the markets have stabilized a little bit since and because it doesn't really matter when your groceries are still going up and gas is still expensive and rent is going up. So it does seem like I don't know, man. It seems like there's a bit of a turning point right now with just overall public sentiment. And as Joe Biden knows, it's really hard to get it back once it's gone.
Well, well, the other thing is Joe Biden was never at 23% with independents. I don't care what all the other numbers were, he was never there. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Something has broken. And I think it goes beyond the economic numbers, beyond the mass deportations. But I think, and when I look at the number on, where a majority of Americans now say they're ashamed of him being their president, that tells me that they're starting to recognize who and what Donald Trump really is. That a lot of the things that they discounted, shook their heads and said, no, it's exaggeration. No, they're realizing it was all true, that he's been lying to them, that that he doesn't deserve their benefit of the doubt anymore, and that they're actually ashamed of him. That's why the Republicans who are, I mean, who are standing in 2026 now, I'm talking about the senators and House members, governors' races, are desperately trying to figure out how they shore up their ability to hold on to the House and the Senate and the state houses because they know he is taking them down. He is an anchor around their necks. And so, yeah, he's going to, and by the way, he knows if they go down, he's going down. That the investigations in the House and everything else that a Democratic House could do to thwart his attempt to remain in power or, basically prop up JD and undermine the Voting Rights Act and everything else to stay in power in 2028. He knows that doesn't happen unless, and they know, the rest of the MAGA Republicans know, none of that happens if they don't hold the House. And that's why he urged Texas to redistrict 5 years in, 5 years ahead of when they're supposed to. And he's urging other states to do it. And I agree, though, that this is a battle they cannot win. Because if that 23% number with independents continues to hold, and that's why getting loud, making sure everybody understands what's going on, talking to your friends at the water cooler and on social media, and showing up for protests, calling the offices, raising holy hell over this is really important right now because we hold him down and he takes. I said this about I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, that I think we could cripple him within months if the protests rise in enough numbers. And I think we're seeing in the data that there are plenty of Americans. I mean, when you have over 50% of Americans who are ashamed of this guy being their president, think about what would happen if they all just showed up with signs and protests with signs that said, we're ashamed of Donald Trump. I mean, there's 50%, over 50% of the American public. Stop being, great. You're answering a poll question. No, be visible, show it. Make sure people know they're not alone, that we all are feeling this. We're all getting it. And none of us are going to stand for it because it's time to stand up America. And I keep writing that, but I mean it. It's just like a really important period for us. 2026 will be a watershed election if we make it one. But the time to be visible and loud and to not accept any of this is now. That's what will get the court's attention. That's what will make some of these Republicans start thinking about what, because on the other side, when we win, there are going to be consequences. They know that too. That's why they're trying to rig this election and rig these seats.
So we got time for at least one listener question, and I'm glad this one's pretty timely. This is from Steven in Florida, and I'm going to add a little bit to it. He asks, does Ukraine still have a chance? Is Trump still shifting enough to pro-Ukraine for it to matter, or is it just talk? Joe, I just add, obviously, Donald Trump's announced he is going to meet with Putin. So he says there's, quote, great progress, unquote, towards ending the war. This is a trap, right?
Well, I don't see any way Putin's going to agree to a ceasefire or do anything. I mean, look, you and I have been on the ground in Ukraine. We know the place. And some of the issues there. He knows, he believes Russia cannot go on without Ukraine. That it's like in his, it just drives him relentlessly, and we've seen that. And I don't think anything Trump can do. I'm glad that he's turning, that that he's hopefully going to provide Ukraine with what they need. But in the end, and I've said this from the beginning, I don't think the Ukrainian people are never going to give up. They know what happens if Putin takes them. That's why I think it's one of these really strange things where Trump's trying to create an agreement where I don't think either of the two sides really have any intention. I mean, Putin is wants Ukraine. The Ukrainian, I think if Zelensky went out tomorrow and said he signed, that he signed an agreement and Russia's going to keep all the areas that they've taken, there would just be, rebel militia fighters taking on Russia in those areas forever. I mean, it's just, I don't think this is good. So it's going to be interesting. I know they're going to talk. It turns out, I think Putin's decided that being Trump's friend isn't getting him anything except that, Trump, basically tweeting at him in all caps. I think I saw a piece. I can't remember where I saw it today. I think it was in the New York Times that said, you know, Putin really doesn't give a damn what Trump does or says. That he's figured out that there's nothing to gain there, and he's going to do what he wants. And I agree with that.
I mean, remember the deadline, remember
Yeah,
end the war on day one.
yeah.
None of it has ever happened. And
Well, look,
it's
nothing
just
that Trump's promised is nothing. He was going to end the war on day one. The price of eggs was going to
Inflation,
disappear.
everything. Yeah.
Inflation was going to go down, everything in day one. The tariffs, on, off. We don't know if it's, is it Taco Tuesday or something else on Wednesday? So, I think that's my point. I think the American people have seen enough. And particularly, that's what I'm saying, just the partisans, of course, but, the 90 to his support thing. But he's losing, he's actually going down with Republicans. In some polls, I've seen it as low as 79% approval, which is just unheard of, for a sitting president in his own party. So I think, look, when you look at the partisans, there's not a whole lot surprising in any of these polls. But when you look at what's going on with independents, it's something, I mean, just literally shocking. I would literally, these numbers are numbers that you try to look at how you'd retrieve them. How would you, as a strategist, as an advisor, try to woo those voters back?
that's
And
such a good question.
well,
But
you
the thing is,
can't.
it's
No,
doing
you
the
can't
opposite,
because
and you still
he
can't.
no, he can't because remember, alligator Alcatraz, he has to feed the beast. That 80-90% of in the party, of which many of them think things like, and we've talked about this on the show, that that big group in the Republican Party thinks ICE hasn't gone far enough, that they haven't been mean enough, that they haven't been tough enough, that they want them to go further than they've gone. He has to somehow keep, so that's what Alligator Alcatraz was about. It was about feeding red meat to that group in his party that thinks he's not being MAGA enough, which, by the way, the Epstein thing didn't help him with any of those people. Then on top of that, you've got independents who clearly, when you look at the 23% favorable, who are clearly appalled by things like alligator Alcatraz, by deep splitting up families, by the Epstein scandal, covering it up, all that stuff. So he can't keep. It's like literally he's doing the splits, right? He's got to keep the Republicans over there happy with the red meat and alligator Alcatraz, and it
Right.
keeps pushing away independents, moderate Republicans, and there's nothing he can do with, I think, with Democrats. And now it looks like there's nothing he can do with independents. And when you start you're down to 23% with independents, down to and Democrats are at 90% against you. You can't get there from here. There aren't enough
Right. Well,
Republicans
remember,
to do
there's
it.
more of us. Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
Lots more now. That's what I'm saying. A lots more now. So the only way you win is by redrawing lines to make it as to park as many Democratic votes. It won't work in a presidential campaign, by the way, because it's not, it's by states. It'll still be close in a lot of the battlegrounds, and that's how it keeps working. This is why the system that we have, the redrawing of lines that lets them park zillions of Democrats in a few seats, particularly in urban areas. So they cut down the number of seats in the House that Democrats can win. And at the same time, the Electoral College makes it possible in some of these states, well, we all know which ones they are, but where, yeah, you can win the popular vote. He won the popular vote last time, but we creamed him in the popular vote the two previous, 2016, 2020. But it doesn't, again, why is it close? Because the Electoral College. So you've got these built-in mechanisms that the Republicans game to make sure that they'll game the Electoral College. Again, it's the same thing. When you get to the census, what they're going to be able to do is grow seats in Republican states and watch as Democratic states lose seats. They're gonna and remember, you can't look at what he did. He just fired labor statistics folks because he didn't like those. What do you think they're
Because he
going to do
didn't
with
like the
this?
job
What,
numbers. Yeah.
yeah, what do you think when he doesn't like the census numbers? Oh, California's numbers must be really bad. They've lost 30 million people. They only had 20. But they will manipulate all this stuff and manipulate themselves into a majority in the Senate and the House and a majority of electoral votes that we have the facade of legal, bullshit, but that's what it'll be, legal bullshit. And we've got to stand up now. Now is the time.
Joe, I know we have more questions to get to and more on economic data I want to talk about, but we're going to have to wait a week. We're just about out of time.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. And thanks, everyone, for listening to that Trippi show. I haven't talked about it in a while, but please tell your friends to join us at says.us. We're about to have some pretty big news, I think, in the next week or two about a really exciting new decentralized social network protocol that we're working on with other like-minded networks to give people a civil place and start taking back the internet from big tech. And their algorithms and their, basically pumping division to make money, but it's having a massively bad impact on our democracy. Look, thanks for listening. This podcast will always be free and is part of Lincoln Square. So check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. Check out Trippi's take on Substack. Alex is writing, I'm writing there. And also, give a listen to other Lincoln Square podcasts, Rick Wilson's Enemies List, the Lincoln Projects podcast. And thank you all for listening to this one. We'll see you next week.